our panel itself, we're all over right now, right? I'm in
Uh-huh.
Brooklyn. Where are you, Jerry? Where are you again?
I'm currently in New York right now, and I'm in a coffee shop because I'm in the middle of apartment searching.
I love that. Grace, where are you at?
I'm calling in from Mexico City.
Look at that. Even in vacation, we got Grace tuning in. How about you, Rohit? Aren't you somewhere
That's
far
right.
too?
Yeah, it's a little bit dark where I am, but I'm going to show you out the window.
Ooh, are we going to try to guess?
Any guesses?
Any guesses to where Rohit is? I got a lot of Venice in the answers.
Yeah. I'm at the Hotel Daniele out in Venice. I guess the OG Venice. Yeah, not I guess. I know it's the OG Venice, not the one in LA, not the 90291. But yeah, very happy to be here.
I love it. I love it. I think we're waiting for one more speaker. Her name's Trisha. I think if Aaron, there we are. And here we are. So welcome everyone to our panels, Building Your Brand. I'm Liz. I'll kick it off. I'm currently an art director at M Booth, and I'm also a board member in Asians in Advertising, hence the event. And welcome to the second session of the day where we're going to learn all about building your brand. And we have some amazing speakers who I'm just going to let them introduce a little because there's 4 of us here. So I'll kick it off to you first, Rohit, actually.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Rohit. I'm an LA-based creative director at Media Arts Lab. I've been there for 5 years. And then I was at Shy before that, and I was New York BBDO before that. And I got involved with this whole thing through my homie Bernice, who I'm fairly certain is on this call. And Bernice is she brought me in for a podcast interview, and that was fun. And and here I am. I'm very honored to be probably the least accomplished person on this panel, but excited to be with all of you guys today.
And Grace, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hello, my name is Grace Teng, and I'm the Chief Media Officer at Zambezi. And so my background is actually really varied and somewhat, I guess you could say, random, but essentially I've spent 20 years either in LA, New York, DC. When I was in DC, I worked in politics for some time, and I was actually in the private turnaround business for a little bit as well. So I've worked on from agency sales. I mean, you just kind of name it, like I have that background. And then just in terms of clients, I guess there's also ranges, goes from like Lexus to Goldman Sachs, et cetera. But all of it really focused in media and various forms of it. So, later on, we'll be talking about building your brand. And I do have that media angle, and we can explain a little bit more what that is, what that represents, like how that actually fits in with the overall scheme. So like with Rohit, he's on the creative side, and, in media, it's like I'm actually helping find the target audience and having people actually see the ad. So we got to work really closely, because if we don't have one without the other, like nobody actually sees it. So, be happy to answer any questions in that area. And I actually got connected also from Bernice Chow, who's amazing, and also currently at Zambezi. So it's been really great having her here, where we're able to just like talk, hang out, and also just really talk more about specifically Asians in advertising and like how to help one another.
Amazing. And then maybe we can have Jerry introduce himself a little bit.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. I am Jerry. I apologize for the background noise that you might hear, but I'm currently the co-founder of Wonsulting, where our mission is to turn underdogs into winners. And what we do is we help people get jobs. And why I'm on the panel is because I've been creating content on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for the past 2 years now, and have seen some really good traction with the content that we've been creating around job search. And so I'm really interested and excited to hear what the fellow panelists' experiences are, but also share a little bit about what it's like to be on the creator side.
Amazing. And last but not least, Trisha.
Hey y'all, so sorry for the delay, but happy to be here. Thank you so much for thinking of me. I truly appreciate the invite. So yeah, my name is Trisha Sakhuja-Walia, and I am the CEO and co-founder of browngirlmagazine.com. We are a South Asian community-driven platform that interconnects and empowers and engages South Asians living in the diaspora. We do it in 3 ways: by publishing user-generated content, hosting community-driven events, and also producing culturally relevant products. And so in addition to growing Brown Girl, the brand, I am trying my best to grow a few smaller brands within our ecosystem. The first being Slashy Summit. We have our own event that I'll probably talk a little bit more about later. It's coming up next week. It's all about harnessing your multifaceted careers as a slashy. And we also have published our own anthology, Untold, which I'm hoping to release multiple volumes of. And then we also have our own merch called Ladki Power, which stands for Girl Power. It's very synonymous with the work we're doing at Brown Girl. So trying to grow a few different brands at once, which is why this panel is perfect. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for everyone attending. I'm really excited. So let's just kick it off with the basic. What makes a brand? What is a brand, really? And Jerry, why don't you have us start with that?
Sure. So I think I'll come at this at a little bit of a different angle because I'll talk about personal brand. And so to me, what personal branding is what people say or talk about you behind closed doors or when you're not there. And so I began to realize this is so important, especially because I come from a first generation low income background where my parents didn't work in corporate environments and they didn't tell me how important it is for you to have a strong personal brand in and out of corporate environments, such that when you're trying to break into management or executive roles, it becomes such a different ballgame rather than when you're trying to break into entry level roles. And so because of how important that is to me, personal branding is what people think about you or they talk about you behind closed doors.
And how about you, Grace? Maybe from like a media perspective, what do you think? What would you define as a brand? What is a brand?
Yeah. So that's interesting because Jerry's talking about it from like your personal brand perspective. I mean, the concept is the same, but as soon as you think of brand, I think about it from a corporate perspective. And ultimately, it's like, what does your product/company stand for? Like, if you could literally in 1 to 2 sentences have a feeling, an emotion, an ability to really say like what that product is, then I think like that's essentially a brand. So I mean, like some ones that, I personally think of that I also really love is like Nike, right? Because I really love sports. As soon as you hear that word, you see the swoosh, you have a feeling about athleticism, whether it's shoes or whatever, but there's like an immediate emotion, feeling, and an understanding for like what the company stands for.
I think I love that. And so I guess we now know what a brand is. What do you think is the most important thing about building a brand? Maybe Rohit, you can help us explain that.
Yeah, I feel like, I've worked on a lot of brands and, obviously the past 5 years has been dedicated to Apple. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned, because oftentimes you're like, oh, Apple, they're one of the biggest brands in the world. They've got, you kind of just walk in and you can just make shit and then it just works and it sells. You got millions of dollars. But even a large brand has to be maintained and it has to be constantly reinvented, because the way I see it is that your brand is whatever. I mean, there's so many products and competitors in every single space, whether it's film or footwear or whatever. And your brand is kind of whatever makes you not useless in that space. And your competitors it's always, everybody's clawing to the top. And just because you are planting your flag at the top of the mountain, it doesn't mean that the next day you're going to be there, or, you're going to be invited in other places because you have a certain brand. You're great in phones, but does that mean you'll be invited in other sectors? So I think in order to kind of maintain a brand, you have to reinvent it every day. And that means is bringing in new perspectives, new ideas, new ways in. And it's constantly, you have to like, it's, what are those things called when someone, in a movie, someone gets a heart attack, you got the paddles, right? You got to like jump, start like clear. Yeah. You kind of have to do that a lot, not once every 2-3 years, but way more often. So I think that's kind of the way I approach branding. Defibrillator. Thank you, Keith.
And Trisha, maybe if you can elaborate a little bit on building a brand and maybe even building Brown Girl magazine and Slashy a little bit from the ground up.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, so for me, it's all about invoking that feeling of I want more. And so what we're trying to build at Brown Girl is an ecosystem that allows our readers and our consumers to come back for a little bit more, essentially creating a flywheel. So that's why we're producing that user generated content, but then we're hoping that you'll also come to our events so that you'll buy our tickets. And then finally, we're hoping you'll make a purchase at those events of some of the merch that we've dropped. So I really want our brand to be synonymous with your lifestyle. So I see brand building very similar to creating a lifestyle that allows you to touch, feel, smell, and truly have every aspect of Brown Girl in your life. So that's how I envision us growing our brand. And that's kind of what we're putting forward.
I love that. And then what do you think, Grace, what does it mean when we've all heard this term like next level? We hear it from our clients, we hear it from people who are seeking advice on like how to make their brands or personal brands, whatever it may be, to the next level. What does that actually mean, Grace?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, because I think people, like you're saying, like look for it, but like what is the actual definition? So actually, let me just do a quick definition of media, just so folks understand like the genre that I work in. So essentially, in advertising, there's a lot of different sectors. Like as I mentioned, Rohit's in that creative side. So media specifically is the ability to reach people through a specific media type. So like if a client says, hey, I've got $10 million, who's my target audience? How do I reach them? Like, should I be using TV, radio, newspaper, outdoor boards, print? And if it's online, is it search, social? So, I mean, there's a huge gamut of like ways people are using media. And then we basically help them figure out how to do it. So I wanted to give that definition first, because how you actually help a lot of folks, especially in my sector, is I would think like so creative is often very data-based, and you're just, being able to take numbers and then like being able to say, hey, the target audience is here, this is how we reach them. But to bring it to the next level, I really think creativity does need to come into play. So one of the things we do at Zambezi is always creative media. So it's like, how do you elevate that? So for example, one of the things we do for Google Fiber, which is one of our clients, is like on one street. So Google Fiber is only in 14 markets and only specific zip codes. And one of the things that we have is like this out of home truck, where literally on one side and on one street, it's in English. It literally turns right, and then it changes into Spanish. And then, so essentially it's like you're being that target, you're being that thoughtful about where people are. So when I talk about next level, I think it's basically knowing what your objectives are and then bring a creativity into it. And then I would just say like the metaverse, if you really talk about future stuff with gaming, I mean, honestly, that whole sector is where we're all moving towards. And so I guess if you really think about like the future, that is something I've had my eye on, just because I know that is like the next sector of like essentially what we'll be moving into.
Yeah, that's definitely metaverse is something fast approaching. And I know a lot of us have started to dive into that for sure. I wonder if Rohit, you can also maybe describe a little bit what next level means in a creative standpoint.
In a creative standpoint, this is very controversial. And I stand, I think, on the side that their eyes roll at a little bit more. And I think it's actually the next level of a brand right now in the creative space is actually making your brand kind of worse. But this is what I'm trying to say. So back, when in the 80s and the 90s, we had like all these great TV shows and great movies, and some of us could afford, like those little like digital high-end cameras, and like, oh, cool, I can make my own little movie. I did film in school and stuff like that. It's like, but nothing ever looked as good as the pros. And then when you watch these commercials, everything looks so big and so beautiful. And then UGC was, in the early 2000s, that kind of started to pave the way for like people trying to make something that looks great, but it was never as good. And the tides have started to turn, where now, if you look at like, I don't know, a Verizon commercial, you'll see, I remember a few years ago, Verizon was running spots that were like shot vertical, but they were running it on 16:9 TV and just like barred out the sides. And so now it's brands are literally like appropriating everything that people have been doing that's a lot more nitty gritty, down to earth, the humor, the jokes, the all the match cuts, all the just everything that, like that TikTok creators that make is beautiful and is awesome, but that's things that like human beings make, not brands. That's what brands are trying to be. And I think like Jerry can definitely nod his head to this. He's got all these followers because he's making great content, but that content, I don't think a brand would ever have been brave enough to make. And I think now brands are like, yo, we want to do what Jerry's doing. And so I think when I say objectively worse, when you look at a very, classic creative standpoint, well, it's vertical, I don't know if it was shot in 4K, it's all this kind of stuff. Doesn't have a multi-million dollar director. Did Ridley Scott get in on that TikTok? No, we're actually having normal people do it. And I think brands are now, they're sweating because like, oh crap, how can we be like as cool as like normal people? And I think that to me is next level branding, trying to figure out how to do that authentically.
I love that. Maybe Jerry, you can even chime in a little bit on what you have done to like take Wonsulting to the next level.
Sure. Type in the comments here. Does anyone want to be a creator, or at least want to learn more about being a creator? Type in the chat if that interests you.
Oh, it is flying in.
I love it. So completely agree with what Rohit said. So we recently did a huge brand partnership with LinkedIn, where they basically hired me and my co-founder to make them pretty much TikTok, Instagram like videos so that they could run ads on them, right? And as I think about that, they completely agree with Rohit that if there's one thing that I've learned from creating content on various platforms, it's been that people want to see that authenticity. When you see such high quality, crazy videos, you sort of think that's corporate. And I think people are starting to stray away from things that have the corporate feel to it. But the more that you can make it seem like it's just, hey, like your mentor feel or your friend who's just talking to you, the more authentic and more real it is, the more it attracts and sort of taps into the user. That's probably one of the biggest ways we've adapted our content at Wonsulting that really helped us get to the next level.
Amazing. I wonder, getting a little serious now, because we are Asians in advertising. I wonder if, and has anyone ever felt that their race was ever an issue? And what advice would you give for people who are going through the same thing, especially in the industry we're in and building brands? I wonder if Jerry, if you actually want to start us off there too.
Sure. Do you mind rewording the question? Sorry, I had a little bit of a lag there.
Yeah. Has anyone ever felt that their race was ever an issue? And what advice would you give for people who are going through the same thing, especially when you're working on a specific brand, your brand, etc.?
Yeah, I'd say there's two populations or two areas in which I felt like my race impacted me as a creator. The first is that in the space that we operate in, historically, the whole idea of career development, career coaching, career enablement for others have historically been very focused, has been very dominated by people who are generally older, people who are Caucasian, and people who have sort of been coaching for 20, 30 years. And so when the next generation of people who want to share their experiences and their learnings through the job search process came up, I think we've gotten a lot of backlash of people saying, hey, listen, who are these guys? They look young. They don't know as much as we do, the old boys club, right? And so that's definitely one of the things we had to overcome as Asian creators. And I can't help but feel like as a result of us sort of overcoming that, this enabled sort of the next generation of creators. And we often hear smaller creators say, hey, listen, because of the way that you guys have shared your content in such an authentic way, that has inspired me to create the same as well. And so to me, I think that's one of the biggest complications I had to overcome as an Asian creator, at least in the social media space. And the second and probably more important thing is that it's impossible for me to find mentors in the space, just because I feel like there aren't too many bigger Asian creators in the professional development space. And as a result, it makes it hard for me to get get feedback on what direction we should move into or how we should grow even further. It very much has felt like we just A/B tested everything and just tried everything and learned by fire.
I love that. And maybe Trisha, if you have any answer as well too, if your race has ever been an issue when you were building a brand.
Of course, this has happened multiple times. I think the reason that, we've had a bit of a slower growth is because, mainstream market doesn't believe that the South Asian diaspora needs platforms like us. And that was proven to me when I raised our first round of capital in the past 6 to 8 months. So much of the feedback that I received was, well, is this truly scalable? And that question was frustrating to hear time and time again. Yes, 1,000,000% content for the South Asian diaspora is definitely scalable, and anyone who believes otherwise just doesn't know the power of our community or the power of how well we spend as well. And so just having to like reiterate that and having to prove that in multiple ways and multiple numbers, multiple graphs and pie charts that I don't understand was ridiculous. What I know is the fact that our community deserves representation, and that's not available today. So being a solo founder, a South Asian woman looking to grow a media company for South Asians, raising capital with venture funding, I literally had every roadblock that you can imagine. And so I definitely worked through it by really honing in on the fact that our community deserves the representation, and we can see it now finally. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I love that for you, and that is happening. And you're giving space to so many South Asian people. And I see it in the comments that they're like resonating with you.
Thank you.
I know while we're still waiting, before we can move on to the QA session, I wonder if anyone in the panel, and I'm opening this up to all 4 of you guys, do you guys have any advice in general for people who are maybe building their personal brand or a company's brand, or, you know, an agency's brand, if anyone has any advice in general?
I'll jump in here. And this is, I think it's almost kind of playing off of the last question, and I think it was really thoughtfully answered by Trisha and Jerry. As you know, I think for me personally, I've always loved, I've always loved attention. So anytime, you know, when I was in media, they'd put me in like all like the propaganda, like with the pictures and like all the company stuff. And I'd always get asked to take pictures, even from projects I wasn't working on. I was like, yes, I get to be in a brochure of sorts. But what I think right now, we're coming into a place where it's almost like, I think there's been like a great awakening in terms of just representation. And I think there's a chance that even the fact that right now we have 248 people dialed into this, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of leadership, right? And I bet you that's probably 240 people that have the chance to, and everybody's gonna be watching this later, has the chance to probably like step up, because your agency or your company or an investor is actually kind of looking for the types like us that are all dialed in now. The Asian market, which is getting big, is getting more influential. I mean, how often, I think there was a question up here that was scrolling that was like, hey, you know, what's popping on TikTok, this and that. It's like, it's often like, you know what, like what's happening on Douyin, you know, how do we then get that before that it hits, you know, other platforms, and then even what's happening in India. There's some cool stuff happening. I think, like, to me, it's I think the in terms of building your own brand or your personal brand or that brand it's just grabbing that one element that maybe you feel could be one of your flaws or one of the things that's holding you back, but turning it into your strength. And just kind of wrap it up, because I don't want to talk forever. But so my name is Rohit. I went to a Catholic school from 1st grade to 8th grade in New Jersey. We moved here from Nigeria when I was 2.5, and I was like the only brown kid in this school. Lots of Irish and Catholic, you know, kids there. And I got bullied like crazy. My name got made fun of. I was roast shit. I was all this kind of stuff, right? And that's what you expect. You bring in funny food that smells weird into class, and everything, that stuff that you just want to like crawl into your own shell and like never pop out like a turtle. That eventually I was like, fuck it, I'm going to own it. And then it's kind of like, I took my name, the thing that I got bullied for, and I turned into my campaign slogan. It's now my Twitter handle, my everything. It's Vohit for Rohit. And what I took was, I think, was one of my greatest sort of like things that holding me back. And because it was foreign, it was weird and all that, I turned that into my own brand. So it's vohitforrohit.com. Find me in all the channels. So I turned that into what I became. So I think everyone here has something that I think they feels like, whether it is a name or whether it's a background or whether it's an accent or whether whatever. There's lots of things we can kind of feel our whole ass back, take that and make that your brand, make that your power, because people are looking for that now. Put yourself in that catalog. People are looking for that. So I think that's my advice, is take what you feel is harming you and make that your strength.
I love that. I mean, I know I was one of those like weird kids in high school too. So definitely made that my brand now. I wonder, Trisha, Grace, Jerry, if anyone else has any additional advice.
Yeah, I guess, it was really interesting hearing everybody's story and background. I think, when I think about when I first started in the industry, like there really wasn't people, of color in any leadership position, specifically in women, like even, I mean, not even women, quite frankly, in some of the places I was at. So I think it was really challenging at that time because I just didn't know what was available. So maybe my first advice is to dream, although it's quite frankly, like the environment's changing so much, but still the concept of dreaming, I just thought, well, maybe one day, like I can, and I think that in itself just kind of helped me move in this forward direction. I guess another thing is, I know this is like so generic, but like a positive attitude, like as soon as like something negative happened, I'd be like, okay, so it's like, a bunch of negative things are going to happen before positive things happen in life sometimes, right? So it's like, okay, that's my first no, cool. I needed that no to get to my yes. No, okay, cool. I'm getting closer to yes. So I kind of feel like this dream plus like this positive attitude has really helped me. And then the third is mentors, so it kind of bummed me out, Jerry, when you were saying that you couldn't find mentors. I will say in the beginning, it was more challenging, but mentors doesn't necessarily have to be one person you talk to once a month. It could literally be an informational interview for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15, 30 minutes max. And then you're just like, I've got this question. I just want to, help me figure out this one solution or this one problem I have. And that's enough. So, it's not necessarily like a long-standing thing, but literally just asking people for help and how they do it. I often say, I feel like I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just need to know how the wheel works for me. So like, if you've built this wheel, like help me learn how you get it. And then I'm going to make it my own. And then that's how I like get through it. And that's been really helpful for me.
I love that. I love the phrase, I just need to know how the wheel works for me. Trisha, it sounded like you wanted to say something too.
No, I think Rohit and Grace covered it so well. Oh my gosh. I mean, I just wanted to piggyback off of Rohit because yeah, same here. I came here when I was 5 years old and I literally knew no words of English. I knew three: flight and train and tooth fairy. I had to ask my gym teacher on the side, I wrote him a note. I'll never forget this in my life. Wrote him a note, slipped it under the door. And I was like, hi, can you teach me how to play kickball? Because I was too embarrassed and obviously was never picked for any team. I'm sure many of us can relate to that story, but I, went through like that typical immigrant journey and had a really hard time, figuring out who I am, what my hyphenated identity is, which really ties back to now going very hard and building this brand that really reconnects us with our hyphenated identity. So I think for all the folks here who are looking to build a brand, really hone in on your roots and your culture and your heritage. And you can still break the model minority myth by attaching yourself to your motherland. And I think that's the beauty of what many of us here are doing, is that we've broken that model minority myth, but we haven't left our roots. And now we're finally coming out to the world and saying, yes, I'm South Asian, Asian American, and I'm proud of it.
I love that. I love that. And I don't know, Jerry, if you want to chime in with an advice before we go into our Q&A session.
Yeah, I mean, how can I follow up? Everyone said such great things. I'll take it from a slightly different lens. And I think this sort of goes into Aaron's question of around how many of us have sort of tapped into our Asian aspect and sort of use that as our superpower. For me, I come from a first generation low income background, and I didn't feel, at the first glance, I think when you sort of think about someone in that way, a lot of people may be ashamed of that, or they might feel like that is something that you shouldn't share publicly. But I think that's one of the things that I feel like has made me different as a creator, is that when I talk to my audience on any of my platforms, I assume that they don't know what a resume is. I assume that they don't know what a job search process is. I assume that they've never had anyone teach them how to wear a suit. I remember when I was a freshman in college, my dad had tied me ties so that, I would just have to bring it up and down and I would never have to tie it. And my roommate was actually the person who like undid it. And I was like, what the heck? And he taught me how to tie that day. So as I sort of think about advice for people who want to be creators and sort of want to tap into to who you are as Asian or Asian Americans, The biggest piece of advice that I've heard have always been just start. If you feel like you might be afraid of what your friends might think or what your colleagues might think, and I think that there's always going to be that initial hurdle of, oh, it's weird, like I see you on LinkedIn or I see you on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. I think once you get over that hurdle, you'll realize that creating content, I believe, is going to be the future, and it's something that I feel like everyone is going to have to do eventually. And we're so nascent in this space already that even when I started creating content, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm too late. But that turned out to be the complete opposite. And so the more I tapped into sort of who I was as a person authentically, and the more I was consistent with the way I was creating content, the more success I sort of seen as a creator.
I love that. And I mean, we were going to move right into Q&A section. And I think it's a great segue because you kind of answered one of the questions that someone asked. And I wonder if anyone else here wanted to answer that was, how much do you lean on the Asian aspect?
I think that's a really interesting question because lean versus it's just a part of you and you just have to like, it's a part of it's just a part of who you are, partly, I guess is how I see it. Yeah, I just going to say, so, I come from a similar background. My parents immigrated here literally with nothing. My dad's like washing dishes as he was studying, mechanical engineering. And so, it is hard growing up when you're just feeling so different. And I think some people were saying that, in terms of certain words are still being mispronounced. Like I find that I do that as well, just because, my parents didn't know how to say anything. So for example, like graham crackers, I always thought that was graham ham crackers because that's how it's spelled on the box, So when everybody's like making fun of you, you're like, wait, what? Like, how am I supposed to know this? So it is still with that same lens sometimes that we operate. I do think, at least for me, especially early on in my career, I had to do a lot of translations, right? It's like, okay, so this, this is what's happening. Like, how do I, translate and make that happen? I mean, because I think being Asian, ultimately, it's a culture, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of being. And so I think it is learning just to how to traverse both, one at work. I mean, I won't say, I don't think I'm different. I feel like I am the same person at work as, with friends, but I do have to figure out how to navigate between the two. I always think of it as a refinement, right? It's still me, but like, how do I be able to like lead or manage or present, in a way that works for everyone. And for me, I think the hardest part was honestly culture. It's like, I knew I could do the work. I knew I could understand the concepts. I knew I could get there. It's just, would I get a chance to do it? And, because there's so much translating going on in my head, do people know how much extra work I feel like I'm putting in to make it seem like where I'm at with everybody else? So I guess it's not so much an answer to the question at hand, but I just think it's a part of you. And in terms of leaning in, I mean, it's like everything in life, like I try and lean into all the positive qualities, but like not speaking up for yourself or not being able to like raise your hand, like that is something I had to learn very actively on how to counter in my head. So there are some things that are positives. I think you lean into it. And when there's not, you just have to work at it. I mean, I feel like that's at least that's how I traversed it.
I love that. Trisha, we actually have a question specifically for you. Being a South Asian woman, any guidelines, resources, or insights on raising funds for your brilliant idea?
Yes, definitely. I raised our first round in a lot of different ways. And I think the best advice I can give to anyone raising capital is go to angellist.com right away and start your own roll-up vehicle fund. That fund is something that you can run independently. You do not need another accredited angel investor to back you on. AngelList actually handles everything for you, the legalities of it all and the wires of it, and obviously, receiving the wires. So essentially this link you can send to other accredited angels and ask them to come on board for small check amounts. So I brought on about 12 South Asian women that have really good companies, really good names that I can essentially drop, but they weren't able to write me a big check. It didn't matter. They were able to write me a small check that I was able to leverage. So anyone who wants to start raising capital, do it through angel lists so that you can at least raise a small amount, get the names that you want on your cap table, and then from there, go out to larger funds and start pitching them and say, hey, I've got XYZ backing me, you should too. So for me personally, when it came to raising capital, I didn't start big. I started really small. I started in my own home, in my own community, and I pitched to folks who I knew watched my journey from day zero and could back me before I went out and tried raising millions of bucks.
I love that. We have a lot of questions. Grace, this one is for you, actually. With all of the events happening, there's a lot of fear from advertisers on having their brands be present during negative news. What are your thoughts on having a brand presence during times of turbulence?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think earlier what we're talking about is authenticity. So on one hand, like from a brand perspective, like how can you be as real as possible? And then on the other hand, there is the reality of essentially what we're talking about. So I'll use two different examples. One is, for example, when I worked on Lexus, like when you're behavioral targeting, sometimes you end up on negative car crashes. Like that's not good. You know, you definitely don't want to be like in an area like where we're talking about that type of stuff. So, but that's less conversational, but that's just like a way that we would not want to be next to that content, just because that's not, you know, it doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, when it comes to conversations, like I currently am working with a brand where we did run some LinkedIn ads, and there was like quite some comments afterwards. And it was more so two people just debating about pay equity, you know, women in the workforce, et cetera. And then there was a debate. Do we keep it? Do we take it off? Because there is, I mean, it wasn't just all, yay, we're so glad you're doing pay equity. This is awesome. It was somebody being like, does this make sense? And you're like, oh my gosh, like, do we want our brand next to it? And there was a discussion and we decided to keep it, because in this case here, it was the brand essentially writing about it, having a stance. And then there was some conversation after, and that's not necessarily related back to the brand. So at that point, we decided just to keep it, because we felt like that, if anything, was starting a conversation, and that's what we were, you know, that, I mean, that's a nature of being on social. So I really do think you got to take it case by case, because it does range. I mean, you know, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it really does range situation by situation.
I love that. Let me stay on the client brand perspective, and then I know we have some personal brands, but while we're still on the client stuff, I do have some questions here about what are ways to convince clients that the Asian experience is just as important to be represented in a brand building? I don't know if Rohit and Grace, I know you guys are in the agency world, if you can help answer that question.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to use metrics to prove the value. I mean, it wasn't until I started working on my current agency that I'd ever worked on a Chinese New Year campaign. I was like, oh, this is sweet. I learned about red envelopes. I learned all this stuff. I was like, whoa, this is like the biggest thing for like, you know, what is like a quarter of the world's population. And I never even knew anything about it, but finally we're like celebrating as a brand, doing that kind of stuff. But it took so long. Recently on LinkedIn, a friend of mine, Imen, she works at Mojo Supermarket in New York, an agency, and one of their agency heads put out something that's like, why is Ramadan never acknowledged? It's such a big holiday for a huge portion of the world. And so I think there's like Holi, Diwali, all these things, right? There's so much culture, even besides the holidays, that I think like it's just for, if you want to like justify from a sheer magnitude number, yeah, there's billions and billions and billions of people, like half the world's population comes out of Asia in some way, or almost half, you know? And I think that's one way, but I still feel there needs to be like a cultural breakthrough in order for us to like, we can put out all the numbers and we can have all the, you know, all the faces in the agency, but I think it needs a cultural breakthrough. And I'm going to address actually really quick a sports question that was asked earlier, because I think this plays into it. And there was a question was asked earlier, is like, do you feel, I think, sorry, I'm just going to restate it in a way, but something about how, oh yeah, would anyone agree that sports can play a role in breaking stereotypes? I think yes, and sports can also play a role in creating cultural validity for certain types of athletes and for certain types of communities. And whether it was Jeremy Lin that showed that, when Lynn Sanity was happening in New York in 2012, I think, showed the world that, an Asian dude can straight up go crazy on the court, right? And this is a dude that was like never given a shot, honestly, because he was Asian. That's literally the truth. And I think all of a sudden, what you then see is now, there's more of an openness to NBA teams looking at Asian players. And all of a sudden, now the Asian community kind of saying, oh my God, maybe they can be part of sports culture. I think we need to find ways to create these little explosions that will eventually be heard, because I don't think we'll ever convince clients or brands to take a leap on our communities through numbers and through case studies. That'll never happen. It's going to have to be something that they feel, that they experience. And the same way that, I'm being a big Knicks fan, just Linsanity was actually one of my favorite moments of sports of my entire life, but also for the representation I finally got to see. And sadly, RIP to my boy Apu, but growing up, that was the only brown person representation I saw on television. Hardworking, immigrant, everybody, I got made fun of. I got called Apu, got the accent, but I don't care. That guy was my guy. And I think that representation eventually, I still think we still have ways to go. Right now, I think there's still a lot of tokenism, but I think what we need to do is find ways for us to light those cultural fires, to create those cultural moments, to then say, boom, this is the moment we all experience together. It was representation for us, but it was a big moment for everyone. And I think that's how we can then get representation. That's how we can then prove the validity of our cultures.
I think there was a build to that question too. And how do you do all that without getting tokenized though?
I mean, it is what it is. I just, like I kind of said, we're still getting tokenized. I still think, there's not a lot of Asian leads that are driving rom-coms, there's not, unless they're like targeted specifically to our Asian communities. And I still think we're going to be tokenized until we can be validated. And it's up to us. It's not up to anybody else. It's up to us to validate ourselves. And I think in order to do that, I'm not going to rely on the rest of the traditional American community to help me. And I think it's up to me to make, like I said, to make these explosions. And
yeah, I mean, I would add to that. I think that's interesting, right? The whole concept of these micro moments essentially, or larger moments at hand, and kind of joining it. I think, first of all, having a forum like this right now in Asians in advertising is great, where we're able to talk about so people can learn, about what they can do. I think the tokenization part, I mean, I try not, to think about, because if I think too much about this stuff, I'm going to start going crazy. Am I this? Am I this? At the end of the day, it's can I do the best work possible? Based off my ability. I always kind of felt I guess it's you got to play the game, and you got to play the game well. And then once you get to the top, then it's at that point, you have more leeway to switch up the rules. You have more leeway to make more impact, but you've got to get there first. So, I mean, if you're on the sideline, being hey, all this needs to be changed, and you're not even in the game, it's LeBron is LeBron because he's amazing and he's made so much statements because he's the best, right? So I guess what fueled me is I need to be the best at my work. And also I actually really enjoy it. So I think it's fairly fun. And then, and then at that point, it's then, for example, at Zambezi, I write an email being hey, Happy Lunar New Year, and, there's things, and then, I'll get emails back being oh my God, I'm so glad people are actually saying this, so, that's just my little way of adding things. But it's also for me, it's kind of we were talking about with Ramadan, et cetera. It's yes, it is for Asians, but it's for people overall. It's kind of what I try to be and to do, because knowing how I feel this way, I feel I'm just more sensitive, or I try to be more empathetic for folks that even I don't understand, right? It's a totally different culture for me, but they may feel that way. So it's by me getting to this position, I just have more leeway. And, I will even say one thing I really do appreciate at Zambezi that I've never seen before is, we do have diversity trainings. It was actually 2 4-hour blocks, which I was pretty sour about in the beginning because it's a very long time, but it ended up being really awesome, because we got to talk to our ELT and we got to talk about race in a way that I cannot ever talk about, because it's like an onion, right? You need time and you need to go through so many layers before you can actually get to the heart of the matter and what's actually happening. And the fact that we had that for our executive team was amazing. And me, being I guess open and more and vulnerable enough to share how I really felt, which I was actually very nervous to do in certain segments. I think that's my little way of changing, perspectives and people asking questions and I'm hoping that, that has like a bit of a butterfly effect where it can help others in that way.
I agree. I feel just to add a little bit on that, I think it's unfortunate that we're in a situation where we are tokenized because of the color of our skin, but I see it as a positive way where like we haven't been in this space where we have been able to be as loud as we are until right now. And I feel like if you are given that opportunity, take that space up because you are leading, you're carving out that path for a future generation. You are becoming role models for like people who are just graduating college to see that it is possible to make it to the top for people of our skin tone, of our background, of our race. So I think take that up. If someone gives you that space, take that space and take as much of that space possible for sure. And then I know we have a lot of other questions. So I think we can maybe shift a little bit to like building your personal brand. Jerry, we have this question for you. Speaking of building your own personal brand, how does one know or even discover what they want to do in that place in the first place?
Yeah, I think when we think of traditional media, I think of people and analysts and teams who sort of strategize and say, all right, step one is going to be this, step two is going to be that, and think about which channels. And the way I think about personal branding, I think you could definitely take a more strategic and analytical approach. But the best thing, sort of my experiences have taught me that the best thing that you can do is just go and just try. I think just doing rather than spending too much time thinking about creating the perfect content or figuring out the perfect medium or figuring out the perfect caption or hashtags, I think are all time that could have been spent creating that additional piece of content. My co-founder, John, told me that it's better to have an 80% piece of content posted every day rather than having 100% piece of content that's posted once a week. And as a result of this, I think it's a whole notion of repetition will make you better. And so that's what I found to be extremely helpful. Think about what you feel like the audience wants and more importantly, think about what you like to do or what you want to talk about. Where the gold mine is going to be where you have the biggest overlap, because then you're going to be motivated to create content, but also it's going to be things that people want to hear. Now, you might feel like, well, I don't know what people want. And so that's where the whole notion of just go and try comes in.
Yeah, amazing. We have another question here that many of us are multi-hyphenates. So it's, where I'm Asian and I'm also a woman. So, that's what a multi-hyphenate is. So this person is saying, as an immigrant with a disability, would love to know, how do you embrace your intersectionality and multi-hyphenate nature in your personal branding? I wonder if Trisha or Jerry can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think the simplest and easiest way is to keep doing it, is to keep talking about your story again and again, keep talking about the points of intersectionality that matter the most to you. I feel like, I've talked about, the brown girl origin story so many times, and sometimes I feel like I'm rambling or it's not, or those details are not needed, or maybe XYZ folks have heard it already. But I think for the most part, the advice that I constantly receive is that you haven't told it enough. Keep talking about it, keep telling it. So even if you're creating content that may look similar to you, just know that not everyone on your feed, not everyone in your social media is catching it when you're posting it anyways. So keep thinking and iterating ideas that allows you to tell that same story in multiple ways through multiple social media platforms. Maybe one day it's a feed post, tomorrow it's a TikTok, another day it's a long form video, whatever it may be. So that's something I'm personally trying to work on myself. Raising capital for me, I think, was like a big turning point where I was like, okay, I really do need to talk about the brown girl origin story, the fact that we've been bootstrapped, the fact that we've had 0 full-time people for the past 8-9 years. Not enough people know it. And so now I'm finally like trying to train my mind to be like, okay, even if I've talked about raising capital 1,000 times, I'm going to do it, 2,000 times. So that'd be my personal advice.
And then I think I have one last question for the group, and anyone can answer this. Have you ever felt like you weren't part of the Asian community? And how did you deal with people telling you that you're not Asian enough or didn't fit the community at all?
I'll I'll take this one.
Go
And
ahead.
this is kind of a fess up. Um, Sometimes it's where I grew up, the friends I had. I didn't grow up actually with, I mean, most of my family's either in Florida or in India. I didn't grow up with a lot of my community. And, I've been called a coconut, which I think I am, brown on the outside, white on the inside. And it's not like a purposeful thing. It's just like the environment in which I grew up. And sometimes I forget, and it's bad. And I think like it's not until I'm reminded, I'm like, oh yeah, I am different. And I don't think that's a good thing, but it's just the fact that, I am definitely, not the norm in terms of like race and makeup and all that kind of stuff. So I actually kind of had a bit of a revelation on this actual like call here. And I was just thinking, I was like, oh my God, we've got like, personal brand marketers, we have content publishing, we have media, we have creative. I'm like, holy shit. We have like all these hundreds and hundreds of people dialed in. We actually could make our own Illuminati in a way, right? We got this Asian Illuminati. Everybody dialed in here has like so many connections, there's a lot of like really like, I'd say influential people here. And this might be honestly the most Asian thing I've done in a while. And it's embarrassing to say, but to me, this is like kind of like the first time I felt connected to a community that I actually am part of. And I'm like really grateful. I'm like really happy for this. And what I want to do is I don't even remember the original question, but I'm just gonna kind of like, wrap it with this for me is that I think like, yes, I actually now remember, yes, I do feel a lack of connection because sometimes I forget there's a need to be connected. But in reality, all these questions, all these comments from the mispronunciations, from like the weird names, half of us have fucking weird names in here. It's great. You own it, and I think like from all of that, it's turning that into power, but we can make it even more powerful and creating those little explosions like I talked about if we do that with each other. So I'm going to make myself available. Reach out to me. Reach out. I don't want to necessarily volunteer everybody else, but I'm sure you guys would say the same. I want to help us push this Asian Illuminati, and I want us to start hiring each other more. I want us to start influencing each other more. I want us to start pushing all of that together because I guess it's pretty cool being a part of community. I just realized this over the past hour. So yeah, that's kind of my really long-winded answer.
No, I love that. And I think a lot of people I see in the comment section really resonating with that. They don't feel Asian enough in their space that they're in. I don't know if anyone else in the panel has like something to add before we close out.
Yeah, I mean, I can just jump into, I think being on the other side in some ways, I definitely felt different from most of my Asian friends. I was definitely the most like ambitious and loud and curious. And like, I remember just being like, what is up with me? Like, why am I like this? I was called the banana, right? So it's like yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And so yeah. I mean, I think for the most part, if you're Asian American or you have two cultures, like where do you fall on the spectrum? Everybody's going to feel a little here, a little here, a little like just depending on the group you're with, depending on who you're talking to. So I think, just navigating that, it is, it's something we have to do. And I think it comes back to like just who you are. Like, again, if I think about all this stuff and I think about like all the ways I'm not enough here, not enough, like I will literally go crazy. So what I just try and do, I guess myself, is just like, what do I like? Like, what do I want to do? Like, what feels comfortable to me? Like just, and then I just try and do it, because again, if I try and define it and stuff, I'll go nuts, And so actually there's something I wanted to address too with Yi Jun, just talking about that there's a need for Asian over excellence for acceptance. Is this something we just have to deal with, or is there another viable approach? I think that's a great question, which is why I want to bring it up. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of balance, right? Like if, I guess, I just wanted to bring, because I thought it was a really good point, and I don't really have a full answer except for myself. Maybe it's like, you'd like to think that people are accepted for just like, where they, like who they are, how they work. And for those who are working or, over excelling, like, I hope that gets rewarded, I guess, in a way, because the work is stronger. And I don't know, but I think that's I think I struggle with that personally sometimes, but at the end of the day, I guess what I can say is based off of my experience, hard work is recognized. And I know that's not the case all the time. And I fully acknowledge that, but I have personally seen in my case, both in LA, New York, it was a little different in DC, but like that if you can find the like-minded person who sees that drive and that heart and whatever it is, then that's who you need to align yourself with. And those are the folks who will take you places. Because otherwise, if, there's just some people who just won't see it. So you just gotta, align with those who do. But yeah, I mean, I am really happy that we have this forum. I think this is really great. Like, this is something, I mean, like when I started in the industry, like just really, quite frankly, didn't exist, and I actually remember the first time I saw an Asian American CEO, and she was a PR executive. I must have like looked at that article and I stared at it for 5 minutes straight because I was like, oh my God, it's possible. Like just maybe, like there's hope for me, and I feel like there's so much more now. And there's such a wide variety of folks in different areas. And so I think for folks to, just continue dialogue, talking about it, and just moving forward with, I think that sounds so cheesy, but like being true to who you are and really trying to, seek that out.
Yes, I know went a little over time and we only have a little left. But Jerry and Trisha, I still want to give you the space to, if you have any last words or add anything else before we move on to the next session.
No, I mean, oh my gosh, all the speakers covered it so well. I'm like literally like nodding my head aggressively right now. So sorry if that got annoying, but I am truly just, grateful to be here. I think building a brand from scratch, bootstrapping it with only freelancers has been a complete whirlwind. But I say this all the time. If I can do it, literally anybody can do it. I was trying to go to law school, took the LSAT 5 times. So I was never even trying to pursue journalism or media. So to think that I now run a business, I knew nothing about numbers. I called my dad and then I said, hey, what is an LLC? I think I need to register my company because Oxford Press from London wants to buy an article at Brown Girl and they needed our EIN number, so like, literally, I like went on it just on a whim and I was like, oh, we can register this. It's not a big deal. Not realizing that once I register a company, I'm stuck for life. So here I am stuck for life in all the best ways. But I think sometimes that is when you build something that you never believed or imagined or dreamed that you could build. So I'd say if you can't imagine it, it's a good thing. Go for it and just follow your gut while you're doing it, because that's truly the only person that matters. Because I've heard all types of wishy-washy advice. And at the end of the day, when I hear myself, I'm like, okay, this is the advice I do want to follow. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say to wrap it up. Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And Jerry, if you want to give a final sign.
Yeah. First, thank you, agents and advertising and everyone for your time and attention today, for just hearing our stories, hearing our experiences. And it sounds like so much of our experiences resonated with so many of us who are trying to do our best in our careers. If there's one thing that I would leave with you all, it's just a challenge for you all to sort of post about your experiences, share your experiences online, because as you can see, a group of 4 of us talking about our own experiences, there's so much good conversations happening in the chat where we're all bouncing ideas and being like, hey, listen, like this is what I've experienced. Oh my gosh, me too. And this doesn't have to end here. If anything, this can be the start of us all as a community having and continuing these types of conversations with our communities and with people so much more, so that we can better empower and enable other agents who maybe don't feel as comfortable to also then start sharing their stories. And so thank you again, everyone, for your time and attention. And I'm really, really honored to have been part of this panel.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. That wraps up our session on brand building. If you liked everyone speaking, you can follow everyone on LinkedIn, and you can find all that in our digital guide.